Okay, Marcus Cacicia Chatty Show. Before we start, I just want to give a massive shout out to my sponsors, Outlaw World. You can get 50% off your purchase using Chatty Show as your promo code. That is Chatty Show as your promo code to get 15% off. But I am joined by Peter Bleksley, a man former undercover cop, but has done so much more. You've done so much more than just being an undercover cop. And it's hard to kind of pinpoint you as, you do so much. And even as a former undercover cop, you still do a lot of, you say, your police work. I guess that's just kind of who you are. So we're here to talk about a lot of different things that Peter's doing or done. But I'd just like to know, how would you define yourself now, currently? What is your job title now?
Sorry, Marcus, you're going to have to need the edit. There was a
So the question was, how would you, or what kind of title would you put yourself under now, job description wise? Because you've done so much, and you're still, after your time with the force, still doing a lot of, police work, I guess you could call it.
I'm an investigative writer, so I investigate and write about my investigations these days. So as opposed to when I was in the cops, when I might write statements that would end up being presented to a court, now I write books that I hope will be presented to an audience that want to follow my investigation, want to engage with it, and of course are entertained by not only my writing, but my broadcasting.
Fantastic. I mean, it's just, there really is a lot to kind of go into conversation with. So I guess we'll just kind of go to the start with you, really. So worked in the police force. When did you start? Explain it all to everybody.
Certainly. Well, I was the product of a one parent family, in essence, because my dad left when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And to be quite honest with you, with the alcoholism and some of the physical abuse that he rained down upon me, at that time, it was good riddance to bad rubbish, albeit I hooked up with him many, many years later and our relationship was entirely different. But so he left. I'm a young kid. My mum couldn't afford to keep the house that we were living in with my elder sister. So that got sold. And my mum and I moved to a flat, and my sister went off to start her nursing training. So there's mum working every day to put food on the table and clothes on my back. I had no role models in my life, none at all. My granddad died when I was 12, bless him. There was nobody near, no uncles. My mum's brother lived in Australia. So there just wasn't a positive male role model that I could look up to, respect, and want to follow. And consequently, albeit, of course, I made my own foolish decisions, I went off the rails a bit, flunked my education, which is a source of huge regret. It really is. If there are young people watching or listening to this, please, education is free. Value it and make the most of it. Because whilst I've done a lot of interesting things in my life, as you'll hear, at the age of 40, I was on the scrap heap of life and I had no education to fall back on. So life would have been easier, I'm sure. I got a handful of O-levels eventually cobbled together. But left school at 16 because you could in those days. And prior to that, I'd truanted, which was foolish. I'd got involved in petty crime, which was equally as stupid. Shoplifting, criminal damage, graffitiing, those kind of idiotic things. But in those days, it was perhaps easier to get a job as a 16-year-old. And I left school. This is how old I am. Sorry, kids, right? But I left school in 1976. Now, let me just point out to you, that is not just after the Second World War had finished, all right? There'd been at least 30 years between them, right? Okay? Right? 1976. And it was a glorious summer. absolutely glorious summer. And one of my passions was fishing. So I took myself off fishing for the summer without a care in the world. I came home every 3 or 4 days to have a bath, grab some more food and go back down there. But eventually it got to sort of the end of the summer and my mum went, you're not going to do this for the rest of your life, So I got a job working as a warehouseman in a chain of stores back in those days called Woolworths, which was a store where you could get sort of everything.
Yeah.
And it was famed for its pick and mix. So I'm working in the warehouse and I loved it. My governor, the manager of the warehouse, was a super fella. We had a good time. We had a laugh. I got on famously with the women on the shop floor. Yes, it was predominant. It was all women.
Yeah.
And the women that I would carry down the big lumps of cheese to the deli counter or, restocking shelves. And I just thoroughly enjoyed myself and had a few quid in my pocket. And that was carrying on. I was happy until yet again I came home. And to my absolute horror, sitting in the lounge of the flat that I shared with my mum was this enormous uniformed policeman. And of course, my first thoughts were, oh shit, what am I going to get arrested for? But fortunately, it wasn't that. This man was one of those much loved local beat bobbies that we had back in the day, and sadly are not as common or as prominent as they used to be. And this bloke had clearly, spoken to my mum at length, and he absolutely got me, completely. Sat me down and sold the idea to me of joining the police cadets. And then after that, going into the police proper. The police cadets in those days was a full-time job. You lived residential in the police cadet college. And he did such a remarkable job. Policing sounded so exciting and something I thought, yeah, this really, really does sound like something for me. And this guy was so professional and just such a lovely guy that before he left, he stuck his hand in his pocket and he pulled out the application form and I filled it in there and then. And a few short weeks later, there I was walking through the gates of Hendon Police Cadet College. I'd had a haircut, obviously. And my life was transformed. I found discipline and respect, things that I previously hadn't engaged with at school. And part of the reason was a lot of the physical training instructors were former Royal Marines, proper hard-nosed military types. And if they said Bleksley down for 10 press-ups, because, I'd have been leaning against a wall or I had a dirty mark on my white plimsolls or maybe I hadn't ironed my PT vest properly. So when they said down to 10, there wasn't an option to go, or what? Because the or what was utterly unthinkable. These people will have turned you into a crowd in a blink of an eye. So I got down and did those 10 press-ups, trust me. And if you didn't do them properly, you'd do another 10. And it was a completely different environment, which I thrived on. Got super fit, played all the sport you could imagine, learnt a bit, did another couple of O-levels and passed those, which kind of doubled my tally from the 2 I'd got at school. I loved it. I thrived on it. 18 months later, I then, at the age of 18 and a half, I joined the police properly and was sworn in as a police constable, went to the training school, which was at the other end of this vast estate that the police owned, and once again, thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm about 18 years and 10 months or so, 11 months old, and I got posted to Peckham in southeast London, an area with chronic social deprivation and an area with a large Afro-Caribbean population. What had happened was that the Windrush generation had come over from the West Indies in the sort of late 50s, early 60s, and by now they'd had their children and they were growing up. And so I went from, because I was born and bred in a fairly leafy outer London borough. You couldn't say I came from the tough side of the streets in any way, shape, or form. But now I was in Peckham amongst some very tough people on some very mean streets.
Yes. So kind of going to that period of time, talking about obviously the Afro-Caribbean communities. Because I just recently watched a documentary on the Yorkshire Ripper, and they talk briefly on that and the relationship between the police force and the Afro-Caribbean community. What was it like for you personally, as a police officer working with those people or within the area of those people? How did you feel, and did you build any good relationships with them at all?
Good relationships? Shamefully, no. They say in the UK that we police by consent. Policing is done with the consent of the public. Well, if you had the misfortune to be a young black man in Peckham and other parts of southeast London in the late 70s or the early 1980s, and your face didn't fit, policing wasn't by consent. Policing was imposed upon you. And quite frankly, I'm very sad to say some of the policing was disgraceful, racist, brutal. Young black men were fitted up and beaten up. Perjury was committed in countless court cases, and it was pretty foul, to put it mildly. And I didn't join the police as a vile, racist piece of work. I didn't. But the peer pressure, and this again is a source of eternal shame for me, the peer pressure, the fact that there was no such thing as whistleblowing, that word hadn't been invented back then. There were no procedures through which you could say, hang on, this ain't right. I kind of saw it and to an extent kind of went along with it. I never pulled anybody up for it because it just seemed to me from where I was looking in whatever direction, this racist policing was there. And I've spoken about it at length in the past, in the newspapers, on TV, and on podcasts, for example. And I've paid a price for that because some old, white, retired, still racist old Bill don't like me telling the truth. Well, so be it. I'm not afraid. I've found out in my life that it's not the truth that's got me in trouble. It's invariably been the lies.
Yeah.
And if you're an organisation like the police, or any organisation, any individual, I feel that you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror every morning and challenge yourself and say to yourself, could I have done something better? Should I have done something differently? And that is why I speak so widely about it. And part of the price I've paid has been a whole heap of abuse from white, former racist cops. Fine, water off a duck's back to me. I've been booted out of every Facebook group imaginable, former police Facebook groups and all of that. They kicked me out of all of those. And I was quite proud to be a member of the Metropolitan Police Ex-Detectives Association for a number of years. And last year, 2020, I got booted out of that because of an article that I gave to the newspaper where I told the truth. And they actually judged that I had brought the association into disrepute. Disrepute? I told the truth. So if telling the truth is a disreputable thing to do, then so be it. They kicked me out. Now, just before I kind of finish on this particular thread, there was some very famous comedians from a long, long time ago called the Marx Brothers, M-A-R-X. And one of them, Groucho Marx, was a very funny man. And he made a quote which went something like this. He said, I wouldn't want to be a part of any club that would have me as a member. And that's kind of how I feel about the Ex-Detectives Association and the Metropolitan Police now, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, it kind of just seems from their perspective that they've clearly retired and left it and felt that they were going to get away with it, or felt that they weren't going to be challenged on their actions back then and their views. However, you've obviously done that, rightfully so. I think that it's massive for people uh, of our generation and even the older generation to understand what the culture and what the atmosphere was like for the police back then. And I think you have every right to express those stories, because there are still certain issues today with the police, and they just don't like it. Clearly, they felt that they'd retired and they were done with any challenges in their life. So, for you personally, do you just see them kind of pushing you away and kind of shutting you off as them knowing that they are in the wrong, or do you just see it and disregarding you as a threat as well? Do you see that, or do you just genuinely think that they're genuinely from that time of, that period of time where they don't see what they've done as racist?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think there are a number of factors at play here. I think that many of them are in denial. They don't want to accept the truth. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that every cop at every police station throughout the Met
Yeah,
behaved in such a way, because I worked at Peckham and I knew what went on at Brixton and some of the other local nicks, of course. So I'm not making it a blanket accusation, but what I say is very accurate because I was there, saw it, heard it, witnessed it. So some are in denial. Some think that I'm making a blanket accusation, and they need to drill down on the detail of what I say. So they're just plain wrong. And I think that if ever you want to annoy, if ever you want a racist to show their true colours for what they are, annoy them. Because when you annoy a racist, they can't help
you
themselves,
can't
and it
resist.
just tumbles out of their mouths because they're annoyed. So, and clearly I do that. I've given an interview for a BBC One series that's going to come out in April,
Oh,
because
class.
this year it's the 40th anniversary of the Brixton riots in 1981.
Right.
And so there's a film directed by Steve McQueen, the very famous Oscar-winning director. And I've given an interview to that. And if they thought they were irritated by what I said in the past, if
Oh.
most of my interview survives the cutting room floor, then they will be going ballistic once again.
Well, I think that it's it is very courageous of you. I know that you're obviously doing it for all the right reasons, but it could be very easy when you were, especially the police force as well, to just stay quiet. As we've seen throughout, it's easier to stay quiet. But I commend you on your honesty with the people. I think that that's massive. And also, I feel like do you see it as your way of, obviously, you talk about the deep regret you have of when you were a police officer, that there wasn't very much that you could do about it to counter the abuse that people suffered then. Do you see it as your kind of way of getting better as an individual as well? Is that how you view your honesty as well and sharing your stories, or is it generally just doing the right thing for the people?
Yes, thank you. I stopped being a foolish, vile racist decades ago. I realised the error of my ways years and years and years ago. And the man who sits in front of you now bears no resemblance to the vile racist thug that I was 40 years ago, none whatsoever. But I see it as my public duty to tell the truth, because whilst it is what academics might call contemporary history from 40 years ago, it's still really important. And I know it means a lot to people because they contact me and they say, thank you, Peter, for telling the truth. We now feel vindicated because we've been saying this for years. And I've been saying it for years. I was saying this publicly 20 years ago, 25 years ago, on other sort of anniversary programs about Brixton and stuff. It just seems that some of these numbskulls have only recently sort of heard me talking about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's my public service. It's my duty to my fellow human being to tell the truth, in the hope that it will make organisations look themselves in the mirror and make change where change is needed. And they have done. Let's not beat around the bush here. The police are unrecognisable from what they were 40 years ago. And a lot of credit needs to go to a lot of people for that. I salute them for that wholeheartedly. But there is still work to be done. You know, the police are a reflection of society. So it stands to reason there will be people that are racist still within that organisation, but they are nowhere near in the numbers that they were. And credit to the police making it a very, very uncomfortable, if not impossible, place for a vile racist cop to live and operate.
That is very true, because I wanted to ask you, there is clearly a difference in how the policing is done, but was going to ask you on how much of a change, but clearly you've just elaborated. It's been very well placed in the police system, and of course we will get our sour grapes at times, but as you say, it's a reflection on the public. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on the situation in America that's just kind of arisen recently. So how would you view, so you had in the summer all the Black Lives Matter protests, and the police responded aggressively to those protests, and you had the Capitol protest, if you want to call it a protest. I see it as a terrorist act, personally. How would you view it differently? Would you say it would have been treated differently had you'd reversed the two races on the protest? So if you'd put the white people on the Black Lives Matter protest, or is that a bit unfair? Do you think, what would you say?
America clearly has a huge issue with race, both in its society and within elements of its law enforcement bodies. America has tens of thousands of law enforcement bodies, different police forces scattered across that vast nation. And therein, I think, lies part of the problem. We've got 43 different police forces in the UK. They've got tens of thousands. And so I think a uniformity of training and attitudes is much harder to achieve out there than it is over here. And whilst we, of course, have considerable heartbreaking issues over race in this country, America has a plague. I think it's an interesting contrast, and you're very right to highlight that, between what may have happened to, shall we say, the protesters at Capitol Hill if they had been predominantly black. I think that's a fair question, a hypothetical question to ask. And is there a difference? But my heart sinks. I was watching the news earlier today, and they're interviewing all these paramilitary groups that are heavily, heavily armed in America. And by crikey, it's just ludicrous. And I'm very glad I don't live in that great nation. I had the pleasure of going there many times, both for work and holiday years ago. And I would still recommend it as a holiday destination when we can all get back on aeroplanes and have some degree of normality. But I certainly won't want to live.
No, their issues are deep, and they just run back to, of course, the history of America is just kind of still sweeping into America today, and a lot of people still hold those values, unfortunately. But I just wanted to get your idea.
Indeed, they do.
Yeah.
But I think to summarise my thoughts, if I may, just for a moment.
Yeah,
Marcus,
of course.
If you judge someone or you hold views about another person based merely on the colour of their skin, or their faith, or where they originate from, or the language they speak, then you are a complete dick.
Yes, that is very true. I've always, I guess it's just kind of the generation I've grown up in, and just how my mum and dad have raised me. I've never kind of, and which I'm glad to not understand, but it's always confused me how you could be sort of racist and discriminative to someone based on who they are. Like it genuinely, there's criticism and then there is discrimination, as you say. I've been criticized and people get criticized all the time, but there is a vast difference between it, and you can tell it by tone, language, and energy. And I've personally just never understood how one could think like that. And I guess, I mean, that's a great thing to not understand, because I wouldn't want to, and then I wouldn't want to act on it. But it seems very ignorant. And I'm just perplexed by it. But I've always kind of, with this podcast and this platform, I've always felt that I could, bring someone on and get their views, regardless, how extreme or how minimal they are, because I believe that conversation is vastly important. I think if you disregard them and shun them, they don't learn anything and they don't get the chance to. And then you, as a person, haven't done your bit to sort of say, to educate. With yourself, Peter, growing up in that time, how, did you come to realize that how people were being treated based on their ethnicity and their nationality? How did you come to realize that it's wrong, sort of thing, and really put the stamp on that is?
Well, I had a life-changing moment at the Brixton riots in April of 1981. Brixton was a neighbouring district to ours in Peckham, where I was based. And one Friday afternoon, I was in a long wheelbase transit van with windows that was green. There was a dozen of us cops cobbled together into what was called a divisional support unit. So wherever there was what is now called a crime hotspot, the 12 of us would go there. We would police it, lots of patrols, lots of visibility, and try and stamp down on any particular crime spree that might be happening in any given local area. Well, on the Friday afternoon, we had an extremely long week. We dropped most of the boys off so they could collect their cars and go home early. Part of my language, but Friday was known as Poets' Day. Piss off early, tomorrow's Saturday, Poets' Day. Okay. So we dropped people off, and there was about 3 or 4 of us left in the van, and this shout went up for urgent assistance in Brixton. So we've gone, right, we'll have a look at that. Jumped on the radio. Yeah, we're on our way. We went there. Now, the backdrop to all of this is that in a very unsophisticated and probably inherently racist manner, Brixton's senior police officers had launched Operation Swamp on the streets of Brixton in the weeks leading up to it. And it did exactly what it said on the can. They swamped the streets of Brixton with every police officer they could find. And their brief basically was, if it moves, stop and search it. Well, some officers there needed no encouragement to fit people up and beat people up. That was, unfortunately, among some officers and some units, a fairly common practice. So with that backdrop, tensions are already running very high. Railton Road, R-A-I-L-T-O-N, Railton Road, as I would pronounce it with my South London twang, in Brixton, was known as the front line. Again, heavily populated by people of an Afro-Caribbean origin. And it was known that there was drug dealing there, and it was a bit of a no-go area, and there was a lot of tension between police and those people living there in any event, or many of the people living there. So the screen comes up, Railton Road, we tear off down there. And when we get there, already there is a bit of a standoff between a few police officers and a few clearly very aggravated members of the public. There's swearing, there's gestures, there's a couple of things being lobbed. And the backdrop to that was a young black man had been stabbed. We found this out pretty quickly. Was on the ground, and in order to stem the bleeding, a uniformed police officer had put his knee on the wound in this young black man's back. Now, that had been construed by some people as this stabbing victim being arrested. And so amongst all this confusion, Chinese whispers and things being said that weren't necessarily accurate, the tension is really, really bubbling. Bearing in mind, you've got the backdrop of Operation Swamp for the previous few weeks. So we get there, we try in our uncomplicated policing way to have a show of strength and basically quell this early kind of uprising. Well, we had a few shields in the back, so they came out the back of the van. You know, we battered off a few things that are being slung at us, and we moved forward, you know, truncheons, let's quell this. Let's nip this in the bud and stop it. But very, very early on, you could tell that was just not going to happen because of the numbers of people that gathered on their side, because of the tension and the anger. It was clear that this situation was not going to be dispelled, quelled, or likely to go away. Not long after that, some bright spark of a senior police officer one big loop in our vehicles. There was a number of vehicles from different local police stations, and of course, Brixton itself, a seat of tension already, but now very much heightened emotions on this Friday night. We're going to drive down Roughton Road, down to a place called Tulsill almost, loop back and go again and go again and go again in this never-ending circular motion. We were not to get out of our vehicles. We were not to stop anybody, search anybody, or do anything. Just stay in your vehicles. Well, you didn't have to be Einstein to figure out that this was sheer, utter nonsense. Complete and utter garbage. Because all we became was a very red rag to a very angry bull. There was abuse going to and fro. There were all the hand gestures, of which your audience will be only too familiar. And it just cracked everybody. At one point, we were flagged down by a woman who was the landlady of a local pub. We opened the back doors and she threw a crate of beer into the back of the van. There you go, boys. You know, you're doing a long shift. Have a beer on me. Thank you very much. Further, towards the other end of Roughton Road, we stopped. A lady flagged us down. We started talking to her. Of course, this is before the age of mobile telephones, everybody. Gosh, I'm really that old. And so we had no way of telling our loved ones that we weren't coming home, that we were stuck at work. This lady said, come in and use my telephone. You can ring your friends. So we all trundled in there one at a time and used her phone. I got back in the van and said to everybody, come on, you know, let's have some small change for this lady's telephone bill. You know, telephone bills were expensive in those days. And so we had a whip round and I've got a handful of change, which would more than cover the phone bill. And when it was my turn to go in, which was last, I used the phone, lifted the phone up and put the coins underneath. Okay, so that she would find them, hopefully when she next did the dusting or something. That's from we carried in circuits and circuits. The lady whose phone we'd used flags me down again. I wind down the window because I'm sitting in the front of the van, and she throws the money into the van and says, don't insult me. I had you in my house because I wanted you in my house to use my phone. Don't insult me by paying me for it. All right, thank you very much, blah, 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 blah. Right. So we eventually got home late that night, and the following day, I go back on the Saturday, and it kicks off like you would not believe. The UK had never seen rioting like this, ever before. Brixton burned. The lady from the pub who'd given us a crate of beer the previous night, she got tied up with her husband. Petrol was poured over them. They were threatened with being burned alive. Fortunately, they weren't, but their pub was burnt to the ground. Absolutely burnt to the ground. Hundreds of cars were turned over and petrol bombed or otherwise set on fire. We had everything you could imagine slung at us. If it wasn't nailed down, it was thrown at us. If it was nailed down, they ripped it up and then they threw it at us. Petrol bombs, bricks, railings, everything. It was quite frankly frightening. And so many people wanted to kill me because of the cloth that I wore, because of that symbol of oppression that I represented. Not only repression, but aggression and beatings and fitting up and all of that. Excuse me. It was a miracle that police officers didn't die that weekend. Hundreds were injured. And a politician called Ken Livingstone, who later went on to be mayor of London, got it right, actually, although he outraged millions of people when he said the police got a bloody good hiding that weekend. Well, he was right.
Yeah.
We did. The high street was looted, virtually every shop had its windows smashed in and was looted of everything. And it was quite frankly a terrifying, terrifying experience. I got home early hours of the Sunday morning, didn't go back on the Sunday because I'd done the Friday and Saturday. And I made that decision then that I was going to get out of uniform.
So that instant moment there, that weekend at Brixton made you realize that you were wearing something that perhaps didn't reflect on who you were truthfully. Do you think that it did that? So going back to Brixton collectively, did that riot change the relationship between the police and the people in the community in a positive way afterwards? You felt that seniors had to look at how they were policing things differently. People were looking into the policing there and thinking, right, well, we need to chop and change this. Did that happen in Brixton afterwards, and for a large part of perhaps London as well?
It did to an extent, because the government were really shaken up by this, because Brixton is only 4 miles from Westminster. So very soon afterwards, the Home Secretary then, who was a man called Willie Whitelaw, was photographed walking down the streets of Brixton, and they launched an inquiry. And a very learned, and what the media somewhat disparagingly called a liberal judge, called Lord Scarman, unfortunately, because it did make some difference, but nowhere near enough.
Sorry, Peter, we just cut out a little bit at the beginning of your statement there. So just recap on it. So it did. Yeah. So the Home Secretary, you said, is that correct?
Yeah, Willie Whitelaw, a man called Willie Whitelaw. He was photographed, and filmed on the streets of Brixton. He was the Home Secretary at the time. He appointed a very learned judge who the media sort of disparagingly called a liberal, to conduct an inquiry and write a report about it. It was a very good report, I felt. And that was a springboard for change. There was some organisational change, but unfortunately, it merely hardened the thoughts of some racists. It merely gave them some kind of justification for the way they felt and what they thought. So in that regard, it was it was a disappointment. And of course, we have racist attitudes to this generation. I'm largely to say, they wouldn't judge anybody on the colour of their skin or what faith they followed or anything like that, which of course is a great thing. But, change was slow to come, and there is still work to do. The police need to be on red alert every day to racism and other forms of discrimination and phobias and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a great, I guess for myself as well, who doesn't know a great deal about Brixton, perhaps I'm going to, do my extensive research into it and also watch the show you've done for BBC as well when that comes out in April. But definitely going to look, if you haven't heard much about the Brixton riots, it's definitely worth looking into, because I guess it highlights the issues that the police and Afro-Caribbean communities had. So you take, pause now, slow it down, Marcus. So you go home that weekend, you realise that the uniform that you wear resembles something that you don't believe resembles yourself personally. So what happens then with you? So you take the uniform off, you say, it's not for me, I'm not doing this line of work for the police in. Where does Peter go next in his career?
Well, yeah, thank you. I was fortunate in that I'd been approached about becoming a detective, going into plain clothes and sort of serving an apprenticeship in plain clothes with a view to passing a selection board and becoming a detective. So I hastened that process along. And really, I was very fortunate. Within about 6 short months, I was selected as a detective, and I got posted from the inner city, urban, tough manor that was Peckham. I got posted as a detective in my new suit and shiny shoes to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea in central London. Awfully awful, you know, with a lot of very well-to-do people living there. And it stood in stark contrast to those dreadful streets of Peckham, don't you know? And yeah, it was quite a change. There were still pockets of social deprivation in Kensington on the other side of the Cromwell Road if you went to Earl's Court and stuff. But by and large, this was a different world I was entering. And I had a really fantastic time there. I learned an awful lot about different aspects of policing because there were different crimes being committed. There was a lot of fraud. There was most of the drugs that I'd ever seen in Peckham were cannabis, and now I was seeing a lot of cocaine, and getting into how all that side of the drugs industry worked, and had a great time. Investigated a pretty notorious murder there and managed to solve that, you know, nick the bad guys, and had yet another really good, interesting and informative time. I was absolutely drunk on the job in those days. You know, I couldn't get enough of it. And that went for my entire career, to be honest with you. And so after I'd done 3.5 years at Kensington, that was the sort of time when you had to move on. I wanted to achieve the next ambition, which was to become a Scotland Yard detective. You know, Yard, it has a glittering reputation, still does. And I wanted to be a Scotland Yard techo. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted onto one of those squads. So at the age of 25, there I am with my chest puffed out, young, fit, fearless, walking through the revolving doors at Scotland Yard and thinking, yeah, come on, bring it on.
And what entailed with Scotland Yard then? What was your experience going from being a detective in Kensington to then coming over into Scotland Yard? What were the greater difference that you found straight away when you stepped in and was working there? What were the bigger differences?
Well, I went on to the Central Drug Squad. So basically, I joined Scotland Yard's premier drug fighting capability. So I'd gone from being in a CID office where you investigate reported crime to now being on a proactive squad. So you don't wear a suit, you know, you're very much that plainclothes cop that's got to blend in. And your work is all about investigation, surveillance, covert operations, bugging places. And as I very soon gathered, working undercover. But of course, at this time, it's the mid-1980s. Ronald Reagan, who was president of the United States, is banging on about the war on drugs. His wife, Nancy, has got a worldwide campaign going called Just Say No. Right? Yes. Just say no to drugs. Well, that's been a rip-roaring success, isn't it? Because the whole world has stopped taking drugs. Nobody's ever had a spliff since. No one's done a line, dropped a pill, had a tab, nothing.
Got.
Yeah, well done. That was great foresight, great success. But of course, it wasn't Ronald Reagan that started the war on drugs. Basically, that was President Richard Nixon.
Nixon, yeah.
Later resigned in disgrace. But in 1971, sorry, kids, this sounds like a bloody history lesson, doesn't it? An old bloke. Wake up! Yeah, you know, he described drugs as public enemy number one in 1971. And the media coined that whole war on drugs phrase. So now the war on drugs is kind of like, you know, front page news. It is front page news. And I've got to play my part in my war. You know, I hadn't joined the army or anything like that. And I naively thought I was on the side of the angels and that we were doing good. And not long after I'd got up to Scotland Yard, I'd seen how their undercover operatives had operated for some years. I thought they were in a bit of a rut. I thought they needed to freshen it up. And when the opportunity to work undercover was put forward to our team, you know, the governor said, we've got an undercover job coming today. Anybody fancy having a go at it? My hand went up like a 6-year-old who knows the answers to teachers' questions. Me. And so began 10 bonkers, lunatic, exciting, exhilarating, scary years of working undercover.
Working undercover. But that's it. I guess when people think of that, they think of the films, don't they? They think it's all, you know, that you go to a fancy dinner party that the villain's putting on, and you all go there and you dress nice. But it's really not. When you talk about it, it's extreme what you and many other people have to go through just to get intel, just to get that information, and you've spoke about the effects of it. So just, you know, kind of go into it so that people who are listening, who may not have heard your story and your end in undercover police work, what is it actually like?
Believe you me, in over 10 years of working undercover, I never once wore a tuxedo. Okay? And I never went to a dinner party. I spent my time in pubs, clubs, restaurants, villains' homes, in cars. I travelled the world, pretending to be what I wasn't, pretending to be a gangster, a crook, a villain, and I was good at it. I was a professional liar. You know, I came from Southeast London. My mates were not in the police. So I always made a very, you know, firm decision to keep my friends that weren't cops. So I was no stranger to drugs. I'd seen them, you know. Then, of course, I'd done 7 years of policing, so I'd seen a lot of drugs as well and dealt with a lot of drug dealers. I knew the score. I knew my gear inside out. And I was also very convincing when it came to buying guns, forgeries, counterfeit currency, parcels of stolen goods, high-value stolen goods, lorry loads of whiskey, trainers, you name it, that had been hijacked. And I was also a convincing contract killer. So if you wanted somebody bumped off and we got to hear about it and I got an introduction, I would rock up there pretending to be your contract killer. And we'd sit down and negotiate how I was going to kill someone. So, yeah, I had a lot of variety. Most of the time, had a really good time, albeit much of it was utterly terrifying. I mean, truly terrifying. I was held hostage. I stared down the barrel of a gun more times than I care to mention. I was searched, strip searched, accused of being an undercover old Bill, all manner of things. Just a bonkers 10 years or so. And for anybody that wants to read all about it, here's the first plug of the day, Marcus, right? My book, The Gangbuster, is still out there. And it tells the story of my policing career all the way up until I got medically retired. And that book was published in 2001. And it still sells a trickle of books these days. And people say very nice things about it. So, yeah, it was ludicrous, fun and exhilarating. But it didn't end very well, unfortunately.
Oh dear! What was the? Because I've heard the story, and it baffled. You know, the lack of support. First of all, I wanted to say the lack of support that you get from your workplace baffles me. It truly does, and I know witness. You know, see, you go into witness protection, don't you, at some point in your time? And this is where the issues start to develop, don't they? You know, the paranoia. You mentioned that you used to check your car for 2 years every time you go to your car to check underneath it to see if there was a bomb. I mean, that in itself is crazy. That's a crazy thing to have to do daily, you know, or, you know, every time you go to your car. And just really spiraling into a horrible place. but this doesn't seem. There didn't seem to be, and I granted it's a different time to now, but there didn't seem to be anything for you where you could go to go to Scotland Yard, go to whoever was that was your boss at the time, and say, listen, I need to step out of this. This is really, this is really affecting me now in a different way. So just give us your experience and how you were feeling through all of this and how it panned out.
Yeah, I did a job with an undercover. Okay, so back in the day, me and an undercover operative from the customs infiltrated this gang of very, very tasty individuals with global links to organised crime. In fact, they had links to terrorism, so much so that they said if we couldn't pay them the hundreds of thousands of pounds that we were going to for the drugs, they would accept weapons instead. Right. So these are first division terrorists, or what I suppose I should call Premier League terrorists these days. They delivered £4 million worth of heroin to me in a hotel room at Gatwick. And then a number of them were arrested that day. And of course, when they appeared in court a couple of days later, they're looking round in the dock going, where's that cocky South London bloke with a ponytail? Why isn't he in the dock with us? And then, of course, they figured out that I must have been an undercover cop. You didn't have to be Einstein to work that out. Then they worked on the theory that if they killed me, they killed the evidence. And to an extent, they were right. The FBI had picked up this plot to kill me on a phone tap that they were running in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, that death threat wasn't too much of an issue on its own because they didn't know my real name. They wouldn't know where to find me. And so, that was part of one of the hazards of the job of working undercover and other policing. But that all changed dramatically when a report was compiled. Because this job had involved the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency in America, the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, customs, police, law enforcement agencies from elsewhere in the world, there'd been a lot of organisational infighting over who took primacy over it and all that kind of stuff. The kind of nonsense bureaucratic cobblers that just irritated me and I wouldn't be a part of because I just do my job. I go undercover, I pretend to be the gangster, I convince them I'm one of them. I'm simplifying it all here, and I get them to bring the gear on the plot. It was a lot more challenging than that. Anyway, because of all the infighting, they've asked this detective to compile a report about everything that's gone on. The deputy commissioner wants this report. And one of the detectives on the operational team did exactly that. Now, you get an undercover number allocated to you by the unit at the yard, and you should only ever be referred to by that number in any report. For some unbeknown reason, the person that wrote this report put my real name in it. Now, I'm going to give you a world podcast first here, if I may, Marcus, and you'll forgive me just as I go out of shot for a minute, because I think I've still got... Right. Doesn't make great viewing, does it? Me going out of shot and me going to my bookshelves. I've still got this report here. And if you'll bear with me, so what happens one night, I'm driving home from work and I get a phone call from Scotland Yard and they say, don't go home. Don't go home. And I'm like, why? What's all this about? Use one of your identities and move in to a hotel overnight in a false identity and come to the yard 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and we'll tell you what it's all about. And I'm like, oh, right. get your girlfriend to go to your flat, pack an overnight bag, and meet you at the hotel. Right, okay. We do this. I was a bit puzzled. Needless to say, I got stuck into the minibar in the hotel room that night as I was trying to figure out what on earth this might be all about. So anyway, I go to the yard the following morning, not at 9 o'clock. I go at 8 o'clock, right? I'm a trained detective, and I meet a mate of mine there, and he says, "Have you got any idea what this is all about?" And I said, "No, I haven't got a clue." He held up this report, okay? This very report. And he said, "There's a copy for you because I think you're going to need it. And there's a copy for you to read." Well, I sat down and I read this report, right? Operation Zulu, briefing note, Operation Zulu Cricket. And I was just could not believe what I was reading. There's my name emblazoned through it, my full proper name. And it goes on to talk about the places that are mentioned in here. Yeah. Marseille, France, Paris, who are looking to murder me. And now this report that's got my name in it has not only been written, it was printed off, taken from a police building in an unmarked car, while the officer driving that car went shopping. Guess what happened?
You lost the file.
The car got broken into, and this report got nicked. Okay, so now you've got the existing plot that the FBI have discovered on their phone tab, and the possibility of this report, which has got my name in it, being put together by the bad guys. I'm in deep trouble here, potentially. Deep trouble. So literally overnight, I had to abandon my home, abandon my identity, and move into witness protection. And it was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. You know, I had the constant threat of an assassin's bullet in the back of my head. I was constantly conspiracy theorizing as to how this report had been drawn up and stolen. How could those circumstances ever have come to be? It didn't stack up as far as I was concerned. And I drank too much. Oh, yes, I played a part in my own downfall. Don't think for a moment that I'm saying it was everybody else's fault. I drank too much and I smoked too much, and it didn't help. And to cut a long story short, after a 2-year dreadful stint, during which they still wanted me to work, so on any given day I'd be 3 different people. I get up in the morning, there's my mail on the doormat, reminder of the identity I'm living in this hideout. It wasn't a home, it was a hideout. I drive to work, put the radio on, my happiest hour of the day. I can be myself and listen to whatever tunes I want, get to work, and the governor goes, "We've got another undercover job, Blex, and I want you to do it." So by 11 o'clock in the morning, I've been 3 different people, and I'm living in witness protection. Is it any surprise that I became dreadfully ill? No, it's not really, is it? But nobody saw it coming. Nobody thought to put any precautions in place. And meanwhile, I'm drinking like a fish. Recipe for disaster. So I became extremely unwell, nearly killed a mate of mine in a pub one night by knocking him off a bar stool and then nearly smashing his head in with the bar stool. Fortunately, I stopped just short of killing him. And it was at that point, because trust me, I'm not a man of violence. You know, I've boxed, I've been in a boxing ring, and I've been in scraps at work and all that. You'd expect that when you're on a squad like I was on. But I'm not a man of violence. I abhor violence. And when I realised that I could have quite easily have killed this mate of mine in the pub, I knew how dreadfully ill I was. Moreover, I knew what a danger I'd become to other people. And within a couple of hours, a mate and I were sitting in A&E, and that night I spent my first night in the lock-in psychiatric ward, where I remained for 3.5 weeks. With some medication, I kind of got a bit better. You know, I wasn't right as rain again. Obviously, it was a long battle to regain my mental health, but I did. But it was the end of my career, basically. It was like, you know, that was it. I was never going to work undercover again. I wasn't going to be on a squad like that ever again. And after a sort of bit of a traumatizing time, they then removed me from the squad and put me back at a regular police station where my reputation preceded me. I was very much stigmatized and spoken about behind my back. I knew all that was going on. And it was making me unwell again. So I drove home, drove out of the police station yard one day with the whites of my knuckles like illuminating the inside of the car. And I knew I was going to get ill again. So I drove home and said to my wife, that's it. I'm not going back because this is making me ill. And not long after that, I was medically retired.
Wow, that is intense. That is just the cycle of how, you're talking about your time in the force and the thrill you get and the rush of being, undercover is intense. The adrenaline that you feel, probably nothing like it, or nothing matches to it. And then it just kind of crashes down. And as you say, you're undercover, as difficult as it is, but then as you say, when you're hiding and you're not Peter, it must take its toll. Was that the biggest thing as well? Is, as you say, you had that 1 hour to be you, and then for the rest of the day you were not yourself. Did that really take its toll? Was that the toughest thing, or was it the environment of the hideout? Was it?
It was a combination of it. For years, I'd been two different people in a day. That was fine. I was myself, and then I went and worked undercover. And sometimes I was undercover for days and days, and that was all fine. Because I knew at some point I'd go back to being me. But when I couldn't be me, because I was this bloke who was living in witness protection, it was kind of, and then if you look at things like this now, I'll read you a little bit out of this report. Never been done before ever on any kind of platform anywhere.
Thank you very much.
So we're talking now about the threat that the FBI had on the phone tap in Boston that they discovered, right? And there's all this infighting in amongst all these other organizations, right? And this is now written in bold, okay? So they're talking about tapes of the threat to kill me, right? And remember, I'm in witness protection reading this, trying to figure out how I've got to the place I've got to, right? He was informed that the arrangements were in place, blah, blah. He then disclosed that customs and excise, what used to be called customs and excise, that customs have been in possession of the tapes of the threat conversation for at least 2 weeks, right? And I hadn't been made aware of this. Well, this is a threat against my life. And people are sitting on tapes and not declaring them from one organisation to another. So you imagine in my stressed out state of mind when I'm reading things like this repeatedly, and it just goes on, And now we're talking about the organisations, right? And they're talking about me and the potential for me to die here. It says, it is an understatement to say that the reception was frosty. The officers were initially quite hostile. And these are two organisations that are talking about threats to my life. And they're having fallouts of being hostile towards one another. Hang on, aren't I in the middle of this somehow? Mm-hmm. Don't some people want to kill me? And you're not getting on and doing things for my benefit. You're having tear-ups amongst yourselves. Just gives you a bit of an insight, into what, dark times, obviously. Sorry, just going to reiterate. Yes, I played my part in my own downfall by drinking too much. All things in moderation.
But, I mean, stuff like that, I'm baffled. Crazy fucking world.
Yeah. So anyway, long time ago, and we're all okay now. Well, I am anyway.
Fantastic. I'm glad you're doing well. So after your time, being undercover, you still do say, you mentioned about your books and you write about crime now. And you've done your fair bit on TV as well. I've seen that. But this is the bit that really intrigues me, because I never knew about this man, Kevin Powell, until I found that podcast with you talking about him. And I am amazed how it is not spoken about often and more, and we are not aware of it.
You're a very good man, Marcus. Thank you for this.
Thank you very
I really
much.
appreciate it. Yeah. So after I left the police, the first book, The Gangbuster, plug, still a boy's own story, and women, of course, might enjoy that. Wrote another book, wrote 3 plays for Radio 4, had another breakdown, hospitalized again. So, I've been well now for 15 years at least, so just while I'm on it, and before we get on to Kevin Powell, please, everybody, we've all got mental health, all of us, every single one of us, like we have physical health. And just like physical health, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. We sprain an ankle, we might get something worse. And mental health is really, really important. Please look after it. And it's okay to struggle. Okay, we all have our struggles, and I've been hospitalized twice. I still take a tiny maintenance dose of medication every day of my life. My GP would like me to sack it entirely, but it works for me. So why on earth would I tinker with something that works perfectly well for me? And it enables me to be on TV shows, to write books, to hunt fugitives, to comment on the radio and the telly and all that, have a fulfilling, happy life and career, raise my kids and all of that. There is no shame in having your struggles. Please, please, please talk. If you're having your struggles, talk. There's an old phrase that you might have heard of, which goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. Well, to that extent, I think that has a ring of truth to it. But talk, get the help you need, go to your GP if need be, get those services. Sometimes you've got to fight for them. You might need your family or your friends to be there by your side and to help and to not accept the word no as an answer. And unfortunately, that shouldn't be so, because we need more resources in them.
Yes.
I think probably a lot of us would agree on that. And talk, get the help and take the meds. And I wish you all the very best. And I'd like to think that on the living, breathing hope, that things can and will get better. I've been very, very low in my times, even to the point where I didn't want to go on anymore. But fortunately I did. And I'm here. And they put me on the telly and they put me on the radio and I write books and all of that kind of stuff. And I tell everyone that I take my tablets. And there's no shame in it. And there should be no prejudice. And we're breaking down barriers.
Yes.
Mental health is becoming such a widely spoken about thing. So it's, it's okay to have your struggles, and please talk.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me say that, Mark.
No worries. Honestly, it's a great message. My podcast, I've spoken heavily about mental health on here, so it's another great reinforcement and evidence that life does get better and it can get better. But it starts with the difficult battles and facing them head on and getting people around you. Definitely. I've always liked the idea of living life every 5 minutes, because it shortens everything down, and 5 minutes of being you can make a great difference. And I've never, it's only recently that I've thought like this, and it's helped me so much with that little thing. Even the little things, the stress is minimal, and I feel better. And when I express that I am struggling, or when I am in a bit of a mood and a bit of a grump, but I'm not in the place that I want to be, I find it's easier when I do it in that 5 minutes. When it's fresh, when it's there, it's gone quicker. And I've noticed that heavily, because I hold stuff back. I used to hold a lot of things back and how I feel. I like to be a happy person. I guess everybody does, but I love to be bubbly, energy, cracking jokes, having a laugh. But, unfortunately, we can't always be like that. So I found the best way to be is to address it quickly, so that I can get to be in my normal self, as I say, quicker, because holding on to stuff is awful, as we all know and have experienced. So please just speak up, address long-term issues, short-term issues, and as you say, the issue is halved and people will help. There's always help. You know, and I've said this to any viewer, whether I know you or not. My email, my Instagram is always open for a conversation on how we can help you get better. And I was actually going to start a project, which I still am planning to, is to create a group. It's free. It's on Instagram. Basically, you join this group. It might be on WhatsApp, depending on the numbers, but it's a group where everybody comes together, and whether it's a mental or physical goal, spiritual, emotional goal, whatever it is, I want you to write it down in the chat. And I want to see the progression throughout the year or years, because it could be it could be a long-term project, and I want to see the wins and losses, because it's so important to address when you do well and when you don't do well, because people can come to you with great advice like yourself. Other people can show you that support, and what I'm looking for as well is people love motivation. Motivation is something that drives people crazy, but unfortunately we don't always have a lot of it. But I find when you see a group of people achieving something and you're in a bit of a slump, but you see someone in the group has reached another step closer to their goal, and they've posted in that group, and the praise that people will give them or the feedback that they'll get, it'll make you want to do it, because you'll want that sense of enjoyment. And I'm doing it for nothing. It costs absolutely nothing. I don't want anything from it. I just want people to be happy and to live their best life. So that is something that I'm working on. So anybody listening, anybody at all, if you know someone that needs it, please get in touch with me and we can sort it out.
That's a thing of beauty. I take my hat off to you, Marcus. Wonderful. Because for some people who are having their struggles, just getting out of bed and getting in the shower in the morning, for example, can be an enormous challenge. And people need to be praised if they do that.
Yeah.
Get out of bed, great. That's the first step. If you get in the shower, and you get dressed, that's another great step.
Yeah.
And a cup of tea. And there can be and praised and made to feel better for achieving something like that. Wow, wonderful.
It's the next step by step is something that a lot of people take for granted. And when you're a kid, it's that idea when you're a child, so you see your favorite footballer. I wanted to be, I think being a Cardiff City fan, it was Graham Kavanagh in the midfield for us. So I always wanted to be Graham Kavanagh. But as a child, you don't understand the work that goes into becoming a professional football player. You just want it. So when you're a child and when it's explained to you, it's like, oh, I don't want it. But unfortunately, a lot of people, when they're doing whatever they want to achieve in life, is always difficult. Anything, how big or small it is, there's challenges, and unfortunately those challenges can trigger something in the brain where you don't want to do it, and then it's a downward spiral sort of thing. So just the group in itself, just to be able, as you say, to get up out of bed and to then go and wash, to look after yourself in itself is a step by step. So it's like becoming a football player. To be a good football player, you got to learn how to take a touch. The touch has got to be good, then the passing, then the shooting, then the power, then the accuracy. It all builds up. And that is very much how I view the project that I want to do in any life goal, that it's a bit by bit process. And any small gain, anything that suggests that you're going forward is a success, and it's one step closer to where you need to be. So any small win has to be praised and has to be treated as though you are there, but with the attitude of keep going, of course. So that's what I just want to spread and make people aware of, that the small wins have a larger effect long term, but enjoy those small wins and learn from your losses. That's the greatest thing about life, is that you can change and you can get better. I love that message. Thank you for bringing up mental health. It is something that I really try to promote on this podcast, Peter, and your story goes a long way.
Marvellous. It's my pleasure. And we won't get drawn into too much football. Not now. Maybe another day, right? Yeah. But as you can see from the shirt behind me, I'm a lifelong QPR fan, right? Graham Kavanagh was a favourite player of mine. I thought he was absolute quality. But of course, I don't know how old you are, and I won't be ungentlemanly and ask, but we played Cardiff, Queen's Park Rangers played Cardiff
2003
final at the Millennium Stadium, right? It was, of course, one of the worst days of my life. But maybe one day I'll tell you the full story about the full day that I had.
I was a 4-year-old. I was a 4-year-old boy,
Right.
and I was there with my uncle. He took me to that game because my parents were away, and I remember it. And I still vaguely remember it. And my grandmother used to have the old VHS tapes of the game recorded.
And I've got some memories that I might tell you about. Anyway, moving on. Should we talk about Kevin Powell?
Yes.
Should we talk about Kevin Powell?
Yes. This man needs to be locked up. This man needs to be locked up. And Peter, you can.
Okay. So.
There we go. I've had a bit of connection issue there. I could hear you, but the audio wasn't catching up. But
okay. I'll dive again. Should we talk about Kevin Powell?
Yes, let's talk about this man here.
Okay. It is February 2019, and I've just announced that I'm leaving a very popular show on Channel 4 called Hunted. I did 6 series of Hunted, 4 of the main show and 2 of the celebrity versions. I was there from day one, and on the final series that I was a part of that was broadcasted, we caught all the fugitives, which had been an ambition of ours from the start. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. By crikey, did we celebrate that night. And I kind of felt it was time for me to move on, not only for that reason, but for other reasons as well. So I announced that I'm leaving the show, and I'm just thinking to myself, what is going to be my next major project? And I thought, right, okay. You know, my skills are in investigations. The network of people that I have investigation backgrounds. So many of them do. And what am I best known for? Hunting pretend fugitives on the telly. I thought, well, combine all of those and refine it a bit. And why don't I hunt a real fugitive? Do it for real. And my publisher agreed that I could do that, and agreed when I said I wanted to go after Kevin Powell. So my publisher commissioned me to write a book about my hunt for Kevin Powell with the working title, I'm Coming For You, right? And there's Kevin Powell's picture on there. So I announced my hunt for Kevin Powell at a press conference in London on the 29th of April, 2019. And not long after that, jumped on a train with a man who's become a great mate of mine called Mark Sandell, who's a highly esteemed podcast editor and producer. And we went to Liverpool because 6'6", Kevin Powell, who is now 40 years old, is wanted for 2 crimes in Liverpool. And they are, and I'm holding up to the camera in case you're watching, he's wanted for the murder of 16-year-old, yes, 16-year-old, a boy, Liam Kelly, a child, in essence, who was blasted to death with a shotgun on the 19th of June 2004 in Grafton Street in an area of Liverpool called a Dingle. Liam was called on to what they call a straightener in criminal circles, something where people might get things straight between themselves. It very rarely works out well. And Liam, sadly, was gunned down and murdered. Now, nobody has ever described Liam to me as a model student. And it's fair to say he was a bit of a lively lad. Well, so was I at 16. Liam was denied the opportunity to grow, to mature, to enter manhood, to find a life partner, to have a family, to settle down and provide for them. He was denied all of that because he was blasted to death with a shotgun. The second crime that Kevin Powell is wanted in connection with is the shooting dead of a 22-year-old mother of 3 young children called Lucy Hargreaves, who was blasted to death with a shotgun as she lay on the sofa in her own home on the 3rd of August 2005. Her body and the house was then set on fire, having been doused with petrol. Lucy's partner, a man called Gary Campbell, was upstairs in bed. He'd been out having a drink that night, but he was in bed with their 2-year-old. The other 2 children of Liam and of Lucy's and Gary's were with Lucy's parents that night. Gary, a court was later told, was the intended target that night. But the amateur thug, brutes, idiots that went through that front door got it catastrophically wrong. Not that it would have been right if they'd shot Gary. Of course it wouldn't have been. It's a long story, those 2 crimes, and I'm only giving you the barest bones. Kevin Parle is wanted. He is not convicted. He is wanted for both of those crimes. He has never stood trial for either of those crimes, but he is on the National Crime Agency's most wanted list. So for 20 months, I've been hunting him. I have dedicated my life to finding Kevin Parle, and I will not rest. We all believe in justice, I think. And when there is injustice, it's bad. It's bad enough for us. We might feel that something is not just. You imagine how those who loved Liam and Lucy must feel. And I know, because I'm in constant contact with Gary, Lucy's partner and father of her 3 kids. I know exactly how he feels. So it is my life's mission to find Kevin Parle. Not long after I'd started my hunt for him, the BBC became interested. And fortunately, because of Mark Sandell, you know, the guy I told you came to Liverpool with me, the podcast producer.
Yeah.
Because of Mark's interest and his efforts, the BBC commissioned a 12-part podcast called Manhunt, Finding Kevin Parle. It's out there. It's on BBC Sounds and other platforms. It's won an award at the New York Radio Festival Awards. It's been downloaded over 3 million times. And should you choose to listen to it, I will confidently say you will not be disappointed. The podcast will be back. It's done very well, obviously, so the BBC are pleased, and they have commissioned further episodes. My investigation develops, alters every day of the week, even during lockdown. Lockdown does not mean slow down, because we live in the age of the digital and the desktop detective. So there's stuff that I do from here every day of the week. Please listen to the podcast. Spread the word amongst your friends and family. Get them to download it and listen to it. Of course, as you know, forgive me, I'm an old bloke, but it's not going to cost you anything. And I think you'll find it is a compelling piece of storytelling. The end isn't written yet, but it will be. And we're coming back. And people have loved it and said really nice things about it. In fact, people contact me every day of the week saying, when's it coming back? When's it coming back, Peter? As soon as I can put the information that I've got into the public domain without benefiting Kevin Parle and those who are protecting him, then it will be back.
Fantastic.
So the book, right, which had the working title of I'm Coming For You, my publisher wanted to change the title, not surprisingly. And so at the end of last year, my 4th book, Manhunt, was published. It's very different from the podcast, very different. And thousands of people have enjoyed both because you get stuff out of the pod, you get a lot more that's different out of here. The book is very much my story about what I felt, about what I went through, about the emotions, the mistakes, what I got right, what I got wrong and continue to get wrong, and all of that. And I'm an open book. You know, as I said to you, I think in the run up to this pod, Marcus, no questions are off limits for me. You can ask me whatever you like.
Okay.
And I'm exactly the same when I write. I'm a brutally honest writer, I think. Well, I know. So please. And why do I want you to buy the book? The book is also available on audio. so you can download the audio book, and people have enjoyed the pod and the audio. I know how some of you youngsters don't want to go old school and flick through the pages of a book. Well, you can listen to it on audio, please, if you would. And why do I ask you to do this? Not because I want to order another yacht. Right? What am I talking about? Another yacht? I've never had a yacht of any description anyway, and I don't want one, right? But because with every download, people get to learn about Kevin Powell, and we pay honour and respect to Liam and Lucy's memory. And the more people that hear and know about Kevin Powell and the crimes he's wanted for, the more we shrink the world for him. And I want to squeeze the globe so tightly that eventually his 6'6" head pops up and law enforcement can whack the handcuffs on. So please, and if you buy the book, okay, I ask you to pass the Powell, all right? My publisher doesn't need to hear this, but when you've read it, pass it on to somebody else so they get to know about Kevin Powell and my hunt for him. This is how we spread the word. This is how we raise his profile. And this is how people that, and this has already happened, people that know stuff about Kevin Powell, about whether it was from 15, 20 years ago, or whether it was from 20 hours ago, they pick up the phone, or they text me, or they DM me, or they contact me via my website, or they do whatever they do to let me know stuff. And I'm indebted to everybody that's done that. Just while I was touching on money, right? This is how honest the guy I am. In the last 20 months, through my efforts to hunt Kevin Powell, through both the pod and the book, I have earned £13,000 in 20 months, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not doing this for the money. Every single penny of that £13,000 has gone on my hunt for Kevin Powell. I've been away from home for weeks and weeks and weeks before lockdown and when restrictions were lifted a bit. I've been on planes, trains, automobiles, gallons upon gallons of fuel. And when you're on the road, you have to buy every coffee, every Diet Coke, every sandwich, every bit of dinner. And it's an expensive business. So don't think for a moment this is about money. This is about Powell, not profit. In fact, it's not even about Kevin Powell, and it's most certainly not about me. It is about Liam and Lucy. So please, if you would kindly read, listen, and spread the word, I would be forever indebted to you. And may I say, sorry, Marcus,
no,
can't get a word in edgeways with me.
Honestly, you entertained, Peter. They're here for you.
I am really, really easily contactable, and I will do my best to reply to every message. If it takes a day or three, bear with me. But I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I know where all the oldies live. Right. I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I'm on Insta, kids, right? I'm on Insta. Yeah. And I'm on LinkedIn. Oh, sorry. Right. Right. Okay. So I'm on those 4 platforms. I've got a website, peterbleksley.com. You can message me through that. And here is the best 10 quid I ever spent. It's my little burner phone, my Powell phone, okay? Where people can ring me or text me if they've got information about Powell. If you just want to say, I enjoyed the book, please don't do it on this phone. Do it through one of the other platforms. 07908 617 694. Any information, and I don't care if you knew Kevin Powell is 40 now, if you knew him 36 years ago, that's fine, because past behaviour is often an indicator as to future behaviour. So anything, please get in touch. It'll be fabulous. And if you follow me on my socials, then you'll be kept up to date because I post updates on there and links to various things and all of that.
Yep, that's great news, Peter. I'll make sure when this video gets edited that all this is put into the details in the bio and everything. So getting a hold of Peter is very easy, and I can vouch for that as well. Being in contact with you about arranging this show for a few months, obviously, but set it for this year, and you've been great at responding and very clear. So, guys, honestly, Peter is very happy to engage and discuss with you guys on anything, be it with the book or the investigation that's going on. And I just wanted to say as well, you're talking about the money and the generosity. I can vouch for that as someone that follows you actively on social media. You are a very generous and very giving back person, not only for your work, obviously, for the in the force, but generally now you've done a lot in terms of books for teenagers. Is it for people who are
books for young people? Yeah, 14 to 22 year olds, and I'm going to do another one. I'm probably going to do that tomorrow, actually.
Fantastic, because that is aimed at people who aren't getting perhaps the education that they need at the moment with the lockdowns and everything. So I can vouch that Peter's work is good and it's honest. So when you do speak about money and when you're on about buying the book, it isn't to feed your wallet as such. It is to make sure that we catch Kevin and bring justice to those families of Lucy Hargraves and Liam Kelly. My bad. Yeah, sorry, Liam Kelly. But I wanted to. I mentioned this before we started and briefly as we introduced the book. How haven't the British public heard about this man? This is a murder that has had a house burnt down, a teenager shot. How hasn't this got the press that it rightfully needs to be addressed? There's a murderer out on the loose, obviously abroad. I've seen that recently his links to Thailand, Dubai, as well as Spain now. So
Ireland, Dubai, Thailand, Spain. I know he's been in all those 4 places whilst he's been on the run.
Right. So how does this kind of get swept under and not addressed as it should?
You've read my mind, basically, Marcus. It was part of the reason when I was searching for a fugitive to hunt for, I was so appalled by the crimes that he is wanted in connection with. And I was so flabbergasted that people didn't know about him, that's been one of my main drivers. He's lived the life of blooming Riley, being on the run from law enforcement for over 16 years. But now I'll give you a bit of an insight, because last month I had yet another new source come forward, and I'm always very grateful. You see, the longer I've been doing this, the more people have realised that I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not a smash and grab merchant. I'm not trying to make money out of this, and I'm doing it for the right reasons. People get that, and therefore they go, okay, I think I'll contact Peter and have a meet or have a chat. For years and years and years, I am telling you, Merseyside police believed that Kevin Parr was dead.
Right.
Because they were told that for years. All the information they received was Kevin Parr is dead, Kevin Parr is dead. Well, credit where it's due. That was a very clever rumour to get circulating by those who had his best interests at heart. And of course, it's exactly the sort of rumour you want going around if you're wanted for 2 murders, because it's going to demotivate people, isn't it? It's going to make them think, well, why on earth should we deploy any resources to that? Because all the information says he's dead. Listen to the pod, read the book, and you'll see the evidence in there which proves that he's very much alive. And I've had more recent information as well. Don't believe the urban myth. Don't believe the nonsense. Don't believe the people that jump on social media, call me names and say he's dead, because he isn't. It's nonsense. Merseyside police, a couple of years ago, were given information which They didn't know that I know, if you follow me, right? But I've got my sources. And now they know that I know what they knew 2 years ago, when it all changed, when the information suddenly wasn't he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. It is he's alive. So the pressure's on them. I've had an interesting relationship with them, but I've got a new senior officer dealing with me, and I hope that signals a new relationship. And so I'm positive, because at the end of the day, I do need law enforcement to do their bit, because this is only me, my pen, my notebook, and my mobile phone against serious and organised crime.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got all the advantages. They can break the law, happily, with impunity. They've got the vast resources. Imagine how much they are laughing to themselves if they've listened to your pod and they've learned that I've earned 13 grand in over 20 months. They will be laughing their socks off. But of course, it will make it all the sweeter when he's captured.
Definitely. And, I'm glad that you're talking optimistically now that your work, your joint efforts with the Merseyside Police, and you see that you're very optimistic that work will be done to ensure that he's brought to justice.
I sincerely hope so. I mean, if it isn't, I will go public and criticise as I see fit. But for the time being, I'm optimistic. I'm one of life's sickeningly optimistic people anyway. That's just kind of in my nature, really. I always try and see the best in people, the bright side of things, the possibilities, the optimism, and all of that. And that helps me get over knockbacks in life, because I've had countless knockbacks in life, countless, more than I can mention. I've written 4 books, but I've pitched for double that amount that have all been knocked back. I wrote 3 plays for Radio 4. There's at least 3 that they said no to. And I've been on numerous TV programs, and I've pitched for a load more. So I just
got to keep
helps.
chipping away. But I'm glad that I kind of stumbled upon yourself and the work that you do, because not only are you fascinating and that you have great life stories, but again, I wouldn't have known about this man had I not been highlighted to your work and you discussing it. You mention it in the book, actually, the Madeleine McCann story, very famous. I can only imagine the amount of people that have written and investigated that story, and it's got the publicity of what it is, and rightfully so. It is an issue that needs to be resolved, but this too, and I hope that there's not many more like this, because this is it's a strange book, because obviously when you read books, there's as you say, there's an ending, there's a plot, and this has a lot of frustration in it, because there's no one happy ending, and 2, as you say, the situations leading up, the police believing he's dead, the work that you have to do now, obviously independently, to just get near Kevin is extensive, and it feels like it's not got the resources that it needs. But ultimately, as you say, highlighting this book, highlighting the work that you've done, the podcasts, the audiobook, it will bring people's attention to this man, and I will do my bit as well with this podcast to ensure that people know about this man and what he's done and why he needs to be brought to justice. So any way that I can help personally with the podcast as well, with your investigation, let me know, because it is in my interest as well to see this man face and stand trial.
Well, Marcus, you could do me a huge favour. You used one word to describe my book just then, and you said frustrating. Right? Don't listen to him. Go on to Amazon, read the reviews. People loving this book, right? Okay. One man's frustration is another man's determination, right? This book has got determination seeping through every page, because as you can tell, he's going to be found. We're going to find him. We're going to find him. Don't listen to Marcus and his frustration. It's
Please.
a cracking read, please, right? I know it's just done untold damage to any
You
potential book sales I might have had.
cut me
But I'm
short.
trying to find Kevin
Pete,
Parr.
you
Whose
cut
side
me
are you on?
short. You cut me short. You didn't let me finish.
I was too hung up on the F word.
But
You
it
used
is,
the F word.
but it is a great read because it highlights the work that needs to be done to find this man and the stories of those that are affected.
Thank you.
But it frustrates me as a human being, but as a read, it is fantastic because it's not like many other books, because it is real. It is still ongoing. And I said I'd help Peter, and he's very mad. But it's been an absolute honor to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories with me. I'm sure you've got hundreds and hundreds that I could probably sit here, get a cup of tea, and sit down and discuss them with you so much. But we got other things going on. But you're more than welcome to come on the show again in the future, anytime, to discuss Kevin Powell, any stories you'd like to share. QPR losing to Cardiff in the playoffs, anything at all you'd like to talk about.
And how I very nearly didn't get home that day.
Yes.
Yes, I can tell the tale.
But it has been an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you on my podcast. It means the world to me. So genuinely, thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you for having me, Marcus. I can't wait till we do it all over again.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I know a lot of people have messaged early on before the show happened when I announced it yesterday, and I was kind of speaking to people in general about it, and they were very excited to hear your side of everything. And yeah, it means a great lot. So thank you very much for coming on the show. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you're all staying safe and taking care of yourselves. Thank you very much.